The steel hatch of Ring 4 dropped into the floor with a heavy, echoing groan. Recruit Grendix lunged forward across the slick stone, his 420-kilogram frame striking like a dropped anvil. He swung his primary pincer in a low, horizontal arc that should have broken the human cadet in half. No armor, no warning, no retreat. Cadet Chloe did not jump back from the incoming heavy plates. She stepped directly into the dead zone of the swinging limb, moved her heel 4 centimeters behind his rear support joint, and pulled his wrist tracking rail down into her own center of gravity. A dry, loud snap echoed from the floor vents to the upper tiers of the arena. Grendix did not hit his target. Instead, his own mass flipped him into a wild spin that slammed his head face first into the stone pit. Would you have stepped into the ring, or would you have claimed diplomatic immunity because she did not look for the exit? Stay close. 4 hours before the SciFi cohort ended up pinned to the floor, the intake log on my console required a final structural confirmation. I adjusted the tactical data slate with my secondary limbs, ignoring the small mammal sitting on the lower bench of the pit. My duty at the academy was to forge survivors from the 45 elite recruits assigned to this cycle. The database was clear about what sat before me: a low-density bipedal exchange student with 0 natural defense tools. The close quarters evaluation tests how you handle moving mass, I announced to the arena, keeping my lateral throat scales a smooth default green. In an unarmored encounter, you do not reason with an incoming strike. Size dictates the survival curve. The training bay was filled with the sharp, mechanical hum of the gravity generators holding the room at a constant 1.05 elevation. To my left, 3 Voltron scouts were adjusting their survival harnesses, their feathers rustling with nervous energy. On the far side of the circle, the heavy armor of the SciFi cohort gleamed under the harsh, ion-filtered lights. They had spent 12 cycles dominating the kinetic charts, and they did not appreciate the presence of a soft, unprotected biped from a newly cataloged system. Grendix stepped away from the other recruits, his heavy chest plates clicking against his harness as he expanded his thoracic cavity. He looked toward the lower bench, his 4 dark eyes locking onto the human exchange student who was quietly opening a small synthetic pouch. "Master Vrakish," Grendix rumbled, his vocal box vibrating the floor plates. "The manual says we test our forms against active combatants. Why is the civilian asset occupying space in a combat circle?" "Cadet Chloe is here to witness the physical reality of our doctrine," I replied, typing a verification code into the screen. I did not check her file again. My system had already sorted her under the standard mammalian safety profile. When a subject shows no posture modification or defensive alignment before a predator, the diagnostic model is simple. I logged her state as catatonic fear. An expert is never wrong about the basic laws of biology. Before I could lock the console, a secondary recruit from the heavy cohort, a towering biped named Vrost, stepped into the path. He wanted to clear the lane early. He threw a heavy, weighted training sphere directly at the bench where the human sat, a clear violation of standard safety protocols designed to force a frantic evasion response. Chloe did not look up from her lap as the iron sphere tore through the air toward her skull. Her left hand simply rose 3 centimeters. Her digits caught the kinetic edge of the heavy ball, absorbing the rotation against her palm, and set it down on the stone beside her boots without losing her grip on her sweets. She pulled a blue and orange sugary candy from her green packet and placed it between her teeth, her jaw moving in a slow, rhythmic chew. The room scanner showed her baseline heart rate remained exactly at 72 beats per minute. There was no adrenaline spike. There was no muscle twitch. Grendix saw the casual capture and growled, his upper mandibles flaring wide. "If she is here to witness," Grendix said, his heavy legs thudding against the border rail as he bypassed Vrost, "let her feel the weight of a real charge. Unless the diplomatic favorite prefers to stay behind her sugar rations." The glycerin logicians on the second level let out a low whistle, their damp skin twitching with amusement as they opened a localized betting pool on the display screens. I watched the human girl, expecting her to point to her exchange contract or call for a proctor to clear her lane. Instead, she tucked the crinkly plastic pouch into the front pocket of her gray shirt and stood up. Her soft rubber shoes made a light, squeaking sound as she crossed the white boundary line into the center of Ring 4. She stood 3 meters from an apex native, who had already logged 14 victories in the current trial cycle. I checked the emergency medical override switch with my lower left grip, verifying the plasma shields were charged. "The circle is active," I commanded. "Use restraint, subjugation only." Grendix dropped his weight, his leg joints locking into the standard acceleration block used by the heavy cohort. The sulfur tang of ion-filtered coolant rose from the floor vents as his plates settled into the stone. He was built to crush obstacles through forward inertia alone, a living battering ram designed to shatter defenses. Chloe stood entirely loose, her hands resting at her sides like unweighted ropes. To my professional eye, she looked like a strip of loose cloth waiting for a kinetic storm. Kinetics do not lie. Grendix launched his full frame across the gap, his right pincer extended to pin her ribs. The lunge took less than half a second. Then the floor seemed to tilt. Chloe didn't try to clear the lane or block the heavy shell. She stepped forward, sliding inside the pincer's reach before the mass could transfer into velocity. Her fingers locked onto Grendix's wrist joint, using his own forward acceleration as a rail while her right foot blocked his rear leverage point. Snap! The sound of the primary socket parting under the Skithari's own weight cut through the silence of the arena. Grendix went down hard, the concussive force of his own 420 kilograms registering a direct seismic alert on my terminal screen. He lay on his side, his mandibles clicking in rapid, broken patterns as the medical drones dropped from the ceiling with their stasis fields humming. He was completely trapped under the weight of his own unmoving frame, his primary weapon disabled by a low-mass creature half his height. Chloe stood over him for 3 seconds, her heart rate rising to a minor 84 beats per minute before flattening back to her baseline. Her expression remained neutral. She reached into her pocket, pulled another candy worm from the green pouch, and spoke without changing her breathing pattern. "Sorry," Chloe said, her voice small against the high stone walls. "He stepped too fast. If you don't watch your heels on a slick floor like this, you're gonna have a bad time." My lateral throat scales instantly flushed a bright, burning amber. My digits froze a millimeter above the console keys. The data model had not failed because of a diagnostic error. It had failed because her evolutionary line didn't use fear to process danger. She had stood motionless because her mind was calculating his incoming vector like a targeting array. "Is the trial over, Master Vrakish?" she asked, turning her head toward my desk. "I don't want these to melt." The 45 recruits on the upper tiers did not shift their stance. The Voltron scouts kept their feathers pinned tight against their bodies, their slates forgotten in their grips. Nobody spoke. They simply watched a low-mass mammal walk back to her bench, her rubber soles squeaking on the red stone. Within 20 minutes of the incident, the primary alarm on my console flashed red. The Academy board had opened an immediate emergency review link from the upper spire. The face of High Proctor Maleth filled the main display screen, his secondary mandibles twitching with bureaucratic panic as the automated incident report reached his desk. "Master Vrakish," Maleth hissed, his voice cutting through the quiet of the empty training ring. "The medical bay logs a catastrophic joint failure in a prime Skithari recruit. Explain the hardware malfunction. Which gravity generator failed during the lunge?" "The equipment operated within standard parameters, Proctor," I stated, my throat scales still carrying a faint, stubborn amber hue. "There was no system failure." Then explain how a Tier 1 diplomatic asset displaced 400 kilograms of armored tissue without a kinetic amplifier, Maleth demanded, his screen displaying the recorded combat vectors in looping red lines. The data reads as a software calculation error. Did the human employ an unlisted bioelectric weapon? She used his own heels, I replied plainly, looking down at the white circle where the red stone was still marked by Grendix's shell. She stood where his momentum could not follow, and she let his mass do the braking. The proctor went entirely still on the screen, his 4 eyes widening as he processed the implications. If the report was filed without an equipment error tag, every defensive model in the sector would have to be scrapped. A civilization that measures security by the thickness of its chitin cannot comprehend an enemy that treats raw weight as an engineering shortcut. 2 hours later, Directive 402 was sent to every training bay in the tactical sector. The Strategic Directorate did not cancel the exchange program, but my report reclassified the human profile to a permanent kinetic unknown. No auxiliary unit is permitted to engage them without automated dampeners active. The empty green plastic pouch now rests inside a reinforced glass case outside the training ring. The recruits pass it every morning on their way to the pit. They do not laugh when the exchange shuttle docks, and they watch exactly where they place their heels. They have learned that a weapon doesn't need to roar to be lethal. Sometimes, it just chews.